Hi, everybody. Welcome to your lesson on the nervous system and the endocrine system. Our overview of learning targets, the nervous system, we are going to be able to describe the functions of the nervous system's main divisions and identify the three main types of neurons. The next lesson we're going to get into is on the parts of neurons, and then that's going to lead us into how neurons communicate with each other, otherwise known as neurotransmission. But we're only for today going to talk about the nervous system's main divisions and the three main kinds of neurons. Then for the endocrine system, we're going to describe the nature and functions of it and its interaction with the nervous system. So what is the nervous system? Well, it's the body's speedy electrochemical communication network consisting of all the nerve cells of the peripheral and central nervous systems. And we're going to go over what both of those are in just a second. Before we go over what both of those parts of the nervous system are, we got to talk about what a nerve is. So a nerve is a bundled axon of many neurons that form neural cables connecting the central nervous system with muscles, gland, and sense organs. So we haven't learned at all what axons are yet. We're going to learn what they are in the next lesson when we learn about the parts of a neuron. But we've got nerves that consist of these things called axons, and they form neural cables that connect the central nervous system, which we are going to talk about in a second, with muscles, gland, and sense organs. So you can infer from this that the central nervous system does not include the muscles, the glands, and the sense organs. For example, the optic nerve bundles 1 million axons into a single cable carrying the messages from the eye to the brain. Optic meaning eye. So what are the three types of neurons? The three types are sensory, otherwise known as afferent neurons, motor, efferent, and interneurons. We're going to get into what they are, but afferent starts with an A. Go ahead and commit to your memory. Afferent means at. They both start with an A. And motor, efferent, means exit, exit. Those are what in AP psychology can be considered confusing pairs. So when you've got two terms that are confusing, you really need to be intentional about coming up with some kind of mnemonic device to help you remember it. So we're going to get into what those different types of neurons are in just a sec. So sensory neurons they contain afferent nerve fibers. They carry information from the sense organs to the central nervous system. So we haven't gotten into what the central nervous system is quite yet, but it consists of the brain and the spinal cord. So it carries information from the senses to the brain. So at the brain, afferent at. However, the motor neurons contain efferent neurons, and they carry messages from the central nervous system, so from the brain and spinal cord to the muscles and the glands. So they're opposite, really. So the efferent, it's exiting the brain, and the afferent, it's coming into the brain, at the brain. How is the nervous system divided? We're going to go over this in detail, but this is a wonderful graphic. So we've got the nervous system, and then that breaks into two separate chunks, the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system. As I said in the last slide, the central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord, and you can see that on the right-hand side of the diagram in green. The peripheral nervous system is everything but the brain and the spinal cord, and we'll get into that in a little bit as well. The two chunks of the peripheral nervous system are the autonomic and the somatic. The central nervous system doesn't break down any further than the brain and the spinal cord, so that's easy. The peripheral has multiple breakdowns, though. So peripheral, autonomic, and somatic. Autonomic controls self-regulated action of internal organs and glands. So those are things that happen automatically. Remember, I've said before that in AP psychology, Lots of the new terms and definitions kind of explain themselves. So autonomic is very similar to automatic. So that's how you can remember that. Somatic means body. So you'll be learning about this in biology, but somatic cells mean body cells. So you've got two further breakdowns of the autonomic. That is the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic. The sympathetic is the arousing or like the hyped up. The parasympathetic is the calming. And then you have two breakdowns of the somatic. You have sensory input and motor input. And we'll go over what these are in just a minute. So the central nervous system, again, is made up of the brain and the spinal cord, and it's the decision maker, really. It's responsible for coordinating incoming sensory messages and outgoing motor messages. So it's a communicator back and forth. The peripheral nervous system is made up of sensory and motor neurons. It connects the body to the central nervous system by gathering information from our senses and transmitting messages from the central nervous system. So the two parts of the peripheral nervous system are the somatic and the autonomic. Remember, somatic means body, and the reason that it's called that is because it controls the body's skeletal muscles. It's also called the skeletal nervous system. The autonomic controls the glands and the muscles of the internal organs, such as the heart. And again, I said this earlier, but it operates automatically. So we don't make decisions about our heart beating, right? We don't say, all right, heart, you need to beat, or all right, body, you need to digest. Those are things that happen automatically. And that's the part of the nervous system that's responsible for it. So the autonomic nervous system, I said, was broken down into two parts. It's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. The sympathetic arouses the body, mobilizing its energy, otherwise known as what you guys know as fight or flight or freeze. The sympathetic nervous system is the gas pedal of a car. So it's what really amps you up. You're either going to fight or you're going to flight, or you can freeze. Either way, though, you're getting amped up. Even though you're freezing, you might consider freeze meaning like stopping or resting. In this case, when you're freezing, it means that there's something like really scary or something really traumatic happening that's causing you to stop in your tracks and not be able to move forward, otherwise mobilizing you. The parasympathetic, on the other hand, calms the body and conserves its energy. This is known as rest or digest. This is the brake pedal of the car. So sympathetic, gas pedal, parasympathetic, brake pedal. And one way I have to remember these two is sympathetic starts with an S and gas has an S in it. And parasympathetic, an upside down P can look like a B. So the brake pedal, that's a kind of an easy way to remember the two. So a little bit more about the sympathetic nervous system. It accelerates your heartbeat, raises your blood pressure, slows digestion, raises blood sugar, and cools the body. So this, again, is the arousal. This is the gas pedal. So when you're in a state of fight or flight or in a state of freeze, you're going to have an accelerated heartbeat. You're going to have increased blood pressure, slower digestion. Overall, your body's not going to be in a very great state. Here's the diagram. So we've got sympathetic on the left, parasympathetic on the right. So the notes that you took are on the left-hand side in the box, but just look over all the other things that happen as a result of the sympathetic nervous system being aroused. And on the right, as a result of the parasympathetic nervous system being aroused. So how do the two parts of the central nervous system function? Well, we've got the brain and the spinal cord. The brain is comprised of the cortex and subcortical structures carrying out various functions. And we are going to spend a couple of days on the brain. So this is just a very brief introduction. The brain has the nerves arranged into neural networks, and it's like people grouping in cities. That's an analogy for it. The spinal cord is a two-way connection between the peripheral nervous system and the brain. Its main job is to oversee the sensory and motor pathways of reflexes. And you're going to have some good practice with this and have some free response questions often related to this as well, which we will practice this unit. So how does a reflex occur? Sense receptors in the skin send signals up through the spinal cord via sensory neurons, so the afferent neurons. So classic example, you stub your toe, sense receptor in the skin sends up signals up through the spinal cord to the brain, so at the brain, afferent at. It lets the brain know that you've stubbed your toe. The inner neurons in the spinal cord receive the information from the sensory neurons and send signals back through the motor neurons. So the inner neurons are like the in-between neurons. The motor neurons, the efferent neurons, connect to muscles in the body and direct movement. So that's efferent meaning exit. So if you stub your toe, the afferent neurons send that signal up to the inner neurons who send it up to the brain. The brain sends efferent neurons or motor neurons to connect the muscles in the body and direct movement. So stubbing your toe, you're going to pull it back and say, ouch. That's the job of the efferent neurons. How does a simple reflex occur? A simple reflex, like that to pain, only occurs in the spinal cord before information reaches the brain. So it's kind of like the example I just gave. So look at this diagram. You've got a finger, muscle in the finger, overheat. So that's going to sense heat, right? So it's the skin receptor sense the heat. It goes to the red arrow. The sensory neuron senses incoming information, delivers it to the inner neuron, which delivers it to the brain. The brain then goes back through the spinal cord from the inner neuron down to the motor neuron, the efferent neuron exiting the brain, takes it back to the skin and tells you, ouch, I just touched something hot. And of course, this happens really fast. All right, moving into the endocrine system. The endocrine system is the body's slow chemical communication system, set of glands that secrete hormones into the bloodstream. So the difference between the nervous system and the endocrine system is the nervous system, neurons release neurotransmitters. Endocrine system, glands secrete hormones. Neurosystem, we've got neurotransmitters moving across synapses. We have not learned about neurotransmission or synapses yet. That's coming, so do not freak out. Endocrine system, hormones move through the bloodstream. Nervous system, neural transmission is nano-fast, like the example we just went over. If you touch something hot, you don't sit there and think about it. It can be associated with like being as fast as a text message, whereas the endocrine system, hormonal secretion is slower and can be more equivalent to like an email. They're not literally that amount of time, but giving an analogy, the nervous system is more similar to a text message and the endocrine is an email in terms of how far both of those things take to go through. Text messaging is obviously quicker than an email. So the different glands of the endocrine system, here's a great diagram. The hypothalamus, thyroid, adrenal glands, testes, ovaries, pancreas, parathyroids, and pituitary. I'm going to go over those in more detail. So this is just a nice diagram. If you need to pause and come back to it for a visual, please do so. The adrenal glands are the inner part that helps trigger the fight or flight response. So when the sympathetic nervous system is activated during a fight or flight or freeze event, the adrenal glands release epinephrine and norepinephrine, and the adrenal and the noradrenaline to energize the body. So the main thing you guys want to keep in mind is what it is and what kind of hormone it releases. So we've got adrenal glands. It's associated with the sympathetic nervous system. So that's fight or flight. So in any kind of application, like when you're doing your psychoblurbs, your application is not something that's going to be a calming situation. So it's going to be something that scares you or makes you want to go into fight, flight, or freeze. And then the hormone that's going to be released is epinephrine and norepinephrine to energize the body. Fun fact, norepinephrine or noradrenaline is both a hormone and a neurotransmitter. So epinephrine, adrenaline energizes the body, but norepinephrine is released in the peripheral nervous system to calm the body. So that's pretty cool information. So as far as adrenaline goes with fight or flight or freeze, that's only going to be epinephrine. The norepinephrine is going to be associated with calming, hence the prefix NO before it. The pituitary gland is in the endocrine system's most influential gland. The hypothalamus, which is part of the brain and it controls the pituitary gland. We will learn way more about the hypothalamus when we learn about the brain. But for right now, please make the connection between pituitary and hypothalamus. The hypothalamus directs the pituitary gland to regulate growth and control other endocrine glands. It's part of both the central nervous system and the endocrine system. And that's because it's part of the brain, and the brain is part of the central nervous system. The pituitary gland and its secretions. So growth hormone regulates growth and metabolism. And so that's where if there's any kind of issues with growing, it's going to stem from the pituitary gland. Oxytocin stimulates the uterine contractions of childbirth and milk secretion during breastfeeding, but it also promotes pair bonding, group cohesion, and trust. So it's a hormone that's released from the pituitary gland. So the pituitary gland secretions direct other endocrine glands to secrete their hormones as well. To sum it all up, the learning targets that we were going for today is to understand that the central nervous system is the brain and spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system is divided into the somatic and autonomic systems. The sympathetic and parasympathetic are divisions of the PNS, and that there are 3 types of neurons, the sensory, motor, and interneurons. The next learning target is to describe the nature and functions of the endocrine system and its interaction with the nervous system. The endocrine system secretes hormones into the bloodstream. The adrenal glands release hormones that trigger the fight, flight, or freeze response and can be associated with epinephrine. And the pituitary is the master gland and is influenced by the hypothalamus, which is in the brain, so part of the central nervous system. You guys, I had a fun time with this lesson, and I look forward to doing a lesson check-in with you next class. Enjoy.